The title of this video, The Bridge of Death at the Johnstown Flood.
The valley, stretching back in a straight line for miles, narrows near Johnstown between high hills. It is there that the large stone Pennsylvania Railroad bridge crosses the river. The wall of water swept over the town and met the rushing waters of Stony Creek, recoiled off the mountain, and smashed into the stone bridge. There was a massive collision of forces. Johnstown's houses, people, animals, railroad cars, and trees were violently dashed against the unyielding bridge and jammed together into one solid mass, forming a dam that could not be swept away. The flooding channel of the Conemaugh was choked, and the water surged back, forming the massive whirlpool, further devastating what the first wave did not. Jacob Reese of Pittsburgh recalled
20 million tons of water.
So it's very interesting how someone can have accurate statistics and tell you exactly how much water came down into Johnstown. It's very interesting, isn't it? The statistics they will quote.
Gathering fences, barns, houses, mills, and shops. Down the valley rushed this mighty avalanche of death, leaving nothing but death and destruction behind. When it struck the bridge at Johnstown, the debris was gorged.
Okay, now if these are historic photos, they've been doctored, all right? Because remember, the only thing they had back then basically were the photos and the magazines and newspapers to retell a made-up story to convince the public out there to send in money. So photoshopped photographs were used. Now, of course, they didn't call them Photoshop, but they had their techniques.
And the water dammed up 50 feet in 10 minutes.
The waves went around in circles until most of the houses had been ground to pieces. There were men, women, and children who circled in the frightful vortex for an hour, unable to free themselves.
So I guess there's somebody by the banks of the water there with a stopwatch, and they can tell you there was a vortex for an hour. From
the deadly waters. The force of the current was truly appalling. The best evidence of its force was...
Now there's that photo I dealt with in my other videos on the Johnstown flood. The most ridiculous photo you'll see, and there's like 4 or 5 variations of that photo, and if you put all the variations together, you'll see that they were just using trickery. And once again, what holds up that big toothpick tree take a look at it. I did extensive work on this photo. Now the narrator's going to pass right over it, but I'm not.
Exhibited in the massive debris south of the Pennsylvania Bridge. Persons who were watching from the hillsides declare that houses, solid from their foundation stones, were rushed onto destruction at the rate of 40 miles an hour.
Okay, so let's ask ourselves another question. How does anybody watching debris floating in the water know that it was going at 40 miles an hour? Come on, it's 1889.
On one house, 40 persons were counted. Their cries for help.
Okay, now, here's what I'm going to say. Guess you never know what I'm going to say. Sometimes I don't either. 40. Where do you think that came from? 40 miles an hour, 40 people. Guess where? The Bible. They are giving you some kind of a weird, perverted, made-up hoax story about the flood that came on the earth in the days of Noah. 40 days and 40 nights it rained. That's where they get the 40 miles an hour, the 40 people. Do you get it?
Heard far above the roaring waters. At the bridge, the house parted in the middle, and the cries of the unfortunate people were smothered in the engulfing waters. The worst sight of all was the great fire at the bridge.
So, it's going to get even better. There's going to be a big fire down at the bridge, right?
Which started when oil from an overturned freight car ignited. It made one's blood curdle to think of it. The lurid flames shot heavenward all night Friday, where hundreds of people floated right towards them to meet a death worse than drowning. To look at a sight like that and not be able to render a particle of assistance seemed too awful to bear. Sickened onlookers could hear the shrieks of men, women, and children, and the wild roar of a sea of water sweeping everything before it. Frank McDonald, a railroad conductor, called,
I certainly think I saw 1,000 bodies go over.
Okay, so he's standing there and he's got a sheet of paper and a pencil and he's counting them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, 1,000! Right?
The bridge.
The whole mass had caught on fire. Houses came down and struck the bridge, being smashed into a fiery inferno, incinerating the living inside.
So this is kind of the culmination of the story, whereby the swirling waters get there, the houses get there, the people get there, the dead bodies get there, the fire gets there. So it's like a bridge of death. And later in the commentary section, the director of the museum will talk about if there's any sacred place in Johnstown, it's that bridge. Because all this happened at the bridge of death in Johnstown. Right?
Others were crushed and screamed.
It reminded me of flies on flypaper, struggling to get away, with no hope and no chance of being saved. Then, fading away.
A little girl passed under the bridge just before dark.
Okay, so to make the story even more real, they will do excellent work with propaganda and bring out great emotion. Now, how do you bring out great emotion? Well, this little story here about the little girl.
She was kneeling on part of a floor, and her hands were clasped as if in prayer.
Okay, so there's a little girl kneeling in prayer. She's not panicking. She's kneeling in prayer, right?
Every effort was made to save her. All proved futile. The Hulbert Hotel of Johnstown, a massive 3-story building of 100 rooms, vanished.
It just vanished. Well, anyhow, this was about the bridge of death. It's a bridge of nonsense. Why did they do this? Well, here are my thoughts. it was probably the first major disaster hoaxing in the U.S. And the reason it was done was to acquire an enormous amount of capital to kind of shift everything away from Johnstown, Pennsylvania, up to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Now, Johnstown at this time was very industrial city. It had the Cambria Ironworks, it had lumber companies, it had some steel industry. It was a major, thriving northern industrial city. But those who were in charge, the industrialists, namely Mellon, Frick, Phipps, Carnegie, wanted to shift things away from Johnstown up to Pittsburgh. And they are the ones who were the members of the hunting and fishing club whereby the South Fork Dam was located. So they probably all sat down and said, how can we raise some money? And they said, well, let's try to appeal to the public to send us money. Well, how would you do that? Well, we're going to have a big disaster. And so, what did they do? Yeah, they probably released some water from the Conemaugh Lake area and let it rush down. Yeah, they probably set some fires somewhere. Yeah, they probably used some dynamite and blew up some buildings. Yeah, they probably smashed some railroad cars. Just like the modern day news stories where they put a bunch of junk in front of you and try to tell you there was some major tragedy that occurred there. That's what they did in 1889. So, by about the year 1900, things have shifted to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for the production of steel, because in 1901, Carnegie and Frick, I believe, will form U.S. Steel Corporation, which will be based out of the city of Pittsburgh, and that corporation will then produce the majority of steel in the United States and I believe in the world. So it was a scheme to raise money and shift everything away from Johnstown to another location. Those are my thoughts, and I'd like to thank you for watching this video. End of video.